The Supreme Court has struck down the Trump-era tariffs, sending shockwaves through Washington and the global economy. The controversial taxes on steel, aluminum, and Chinese goods are, in a single legal stroke, gone. Markets reeled as the news broke. In factories, workers and managers now face sudden uncertainty. Hailed by some as a correction to unfair trade, condemned by others as reckless protectionism, the tariffs have now been declared unconstitutional. Outside the court, reactions were mixed, some triumphant, others defeated. The world now waits to see what America does next. The Supreme Court's 6-3 decision declared the executive branch had exceeded its constitutional authority, invalidating sweeping tariffs on steel, aluminum, and Chinese imports. The ruling sent shockwaves through the political establishment, dismantling a core pillar of the previous administration's economic agenda. Inside the White House, officials scrambled to respond to the sudden policy vacuum. Billions in tariff revenue and the fate of protected industries now hang in the balance. The court's decision was about more than trade. It was a clear signal that presidential power has limits, even in the name of national security. For opponents of the tariffs, the ruling was a long-awaited victory, validating years of legal and political challenges. Supporters, stunned, now face the reality of a dramatically altered economic landscape. The decision will dominate headlines and become a central issue in the next election cycle. It forces a reckoning within both parties. Republicans must reconsider economic nationalism, while Democrats must balance opposition to tariffs with concerns about China and American jobs. The court hasn't ended the trade debate, it's moved it to Congress. Lawmakers now face immense pressure to forge a new path for American trade policy. The fight over America's economic future is just beginning. The balance of power between branches of government has been reset. Washington is left scrambling to adapt to a new reality. At the heart of the ruling was Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, a Cold War law meant to let presidents restrict imports threatening national security. The Trump administration used it broadly, targeting even close allies. The Supreme Court rejected this expansive interpretation, ruling it gave the president a blank check to regulate commerce, violating the Constitution's separation of powers. The court found that Section 232 effectively handed Congress's core legislative power to the president, an unconstitutional delegation. The decision sets a precedent. Future trade restrictions on national security grounds must be more direct and immediate. Power over major trade policy now shifts back to Congress. Dissenting justices warned this limits the president's flexibility in a dangerous world, but the majority insisted on restoring constitutional balance. The debate over executive power and trade is far from over. The Trump administration's tariffs were a cornerstone of the America First agenda, starting with steep taxes on steel and aluminum in 2018. Section 232 was used to justify these moves, claiming foreign metals threatened national security. The policy quickly expanded to hundreds of billions in tariffs on Chinese goods, aiming to pressure Beijing on intellectual property and technology transfer. The tariffs raised costs for American companies and consumers, acting as a tax on imported goods. Domestic steel and aluminum producers benefited, but many U.S. manufacturers faced higher input costs. The tariffs triggered a global trade war, with countries like China and the EU retaliating against American exports. Global supply chains were disrupted, forcing companies to rethink production and sourcing. Supporters pointed to a revival in the steel industry and argued tariffs were needed to stand up to China. Critics cited studies showing net job losses and higher prices for consumers. The policy created clear winners and losers, both at home and abroad. The debate over the tariffs' effectiveness remains unresolved. The Supreme Court's decision ends this chapter, but the economic and political aftershocks will linger. The tariffs reshaped the American and global economies. Now, the country must decide what comes next. The legacy of America. First tariffs will be debated for years. The Supreme Court's decision reverberated instantly across world capitals. In Brussels, EU officials welcomed the ruling as a victory for rules-based trade and a chance to reset transatlantic relations. European manufacturers, hit hard by US tariffs, celebrated the prospect of lower costs and stability. In Beijing, the response was measured. China welcomed the end of tariffs but warned that underlying tensions remain. Chinese businesses see an opportunity to regain US market share, but political skepticism in Washington persists. Canada and Mexico, America's closest trading partners, greeted the news with cautious optimism, hoping for restored stability in North American supply chains. Leaders emphasized the damage tariffs inflicted on cross-border trade and the need for renewed cooperation. Not all countries celebrated. Some who benefited from diverted trade now face renewed competition. The era of tariffs forced many nations to diversify supply chains, and skepticism about U.S. reliability as a trading partner lingers. The Supreme Court can remove tariffs, but it can't erase the memory of trade wars. The world is watching to see if this marks a true return to open markets, or just a pause in protectionism. Global economic relationships have been permanently altered. The next moves by the U.S. will shape the future of international trade. Financial markets erupted as the Supreme Court's decision hit the news. Immediate winners included automakers, appliance manufacturers, and retailers, companies that rely on imported steel, aluminum, and Chinese goods. Their stock prices surged on the prospect of lower costs and higher profits. Domestic steel and aluminum producers, however, saw their shares plummet, facing a flood of cheaper imports and existential threats to their businesses. Unions warned of layoffs and plant closures, painting a grim picture for affected communities. Commodity and currency markets swung wildly as traders scrambled to adjust. For businesses, the sudden policy shift created confusion and uncertainty. Long-term contracts and supply chains were thrown into question. The ruling creates both opportunities for innovation and risks of industrial decline. The U.S. may become more efficient and competitive, but could also grow more dependent on foreign suppliers. The market's volatility reflects the tension between free trade's benefits and the risks to domestic industries. The economic landscape has been fundamentally reshaped. The winners and losers of this new era are only beginning to emerge. At its core, the Supreme Court case was about who holds the power to regulate foreign commerce, Congress or the President. Plaintiffs argued the Constitution gives this authority to Congress, not the executive. The government claimed the President needs broad power to protect national security. The court sided with the plaintiffs, reviving the non-delegation doctrine and ruling that Section 232 gave the President unchecked discretion. This decision reasserts congressional authority over trade and signals the court's willingness to police the boundaries between branches of government. The ruling could have far-reaching implications for presidential power in other policy areas. The balance of power envisioned by the framers has been restored, at least for now. The debate over executive authority is far from settled. The Supreme Court's ruling has reignited the debate over America's economic identity. Economic nationalists argue for protecting domestic industries and jobs, even at the cost of higher prices. Free trade advocates believe open markets and global competition benefit everyone through efficiency and innovation. The Trump-era tariffs were the boldest experiment in economic nationalism in decades, dividing both parties and the nation. The court's decision doesn't end the debate, it hands it back to Congress. Now lawmakers must decide: protect specific industries or embrace global competition. The future of American trade policy will be forged through legislative compromise. The stakes are high for workers, businesses, and consumers. The terms of the debate have changed, but the fundamental question remains: what kind of economy does America want? The Supreme Court has spoken, but the challenges that led to the tariffs remain. America faces a crossroads: how to shape its economic future and global role. Congress now holds the power to craft a new trade strategy. Will it legislate clear, limited authority for the president, or invest in American competitiveness? The choices made will set the course for years to come. The ruling also forces a foreign policy reckoning. Can the U.S. repair alliances and address China's rise without tariffs? New tools and strategies are needed to tackle intellectual property theft, market access, and national security. America must decide whether to turn inward or lead the global economic order. The era of Trump tariffs bet on protectionism. The court's decision reopens the path to global engagement. The future is uncertain, filled with both peril and promise. Policymakers, business leaders, and voters now shape the next chapter. The world is watching as the U.S. chooses its path. The future of global trade hangs in the balance.